start the recording. Fine. Right, thank you, Darius. So, like a few years ago, when there was no PRiML, some of the papers that I submitted, and some of which dealing with Paul, and both of us have background in C++. I mean, I kind of take C++ as my first language. They were being rejected at foreign languages conferences and journals for the reason that they were done in C++. And people would reviewers would start telling us, why would you like to bring all this mess to the paper? And why do you want to show your code? Why do you want to do it in C++ at all? Why don't you just go with your own lab language? Why do you want to waste that time with it? And so we had a, maybe I should come this way so that I'm closer to the speaker, because Paul is telling me that I'm not that audible. So, yeah, okay. So then I personally had a lot of difficulty making it to the referees that doing research, doing programming research at programming or in mainstream programming languages has value, and it has even, added value. And so I thought that, okay, if there is no venue that I can publish my stuff, then I should be maybe, well, there's this expression in English, I should be establishing my own church. And so unfortunately, that expression is not quite what I want to do, because people, when people hear these things, they might think that, okay, something like monarchy, a new monarchy is being established, or I don't know, maybe there is no much logic involved. This is just some person wanting to put their own beliefs into reality. Whereas the way I think about it is that this is the community that I would like to grow. And to be honest with you, I don't know how to grow this community. And I am asking you guys for help. I by no means want this to be something that I lead. I would like to be one of the active members of, and I would like you guys to also take active roles. And so I have asked you guys to think about a number of items. Well, I sent you these emails. I understand that a lot of them were quite long. I do apologize for that. I hope I didn't exhaust you. But whether or not you made it to reading all those, I would like to have some think storms on how you think we can make this community thriving and become fruitful and established as a community of doing research in programming language. Does anyone have anything that they would like to put forward, please?
I mean, I find this area very interesting. We're talking about organizing ourselves in such a way that we can do actual work, which is always an interesting question to ask. But I guess one thing to think about is like, what do we, so I'm sort of in an interesting spot. I'm looking at this from the industry perspective. And I think I am, in this group, the only person who's purely in industry. I don't have any academia behind me. So my perspective, when I think about programming language in mainstream languages, my perspective is I want to solve problems. I think Darius is also very much in the industry world. But I have specific problems that I want to resolve and I want to be able to talk to others who are dealing with the same problems, namely around standardization, implementation, and discussion and reasoning about problems. So that's sort of the area that I'm interested in. I'm curious to hear from folks on the other side of this aisle, and also from Darius, who I think is on both probably.
My first reaction really is that the community doesn't have to be grown as a matter of ambition. You must define the scope, you must define what you want to do, and then the community will build around it. And it may be preferable to have a small and focused community rather than, you know, something vague where everybody has a slice, but no one is truly committed. I don't think that growing the community should be a goal per se. I think that establishing what it wants to do, what its goals are, has more value. And doing so, you must at the same time say, okay, this is what this community is, and say very explicitly, very bluntly what this community is not. Not that I have a very firm opinion one way or the other, but there must be an opinion there.
Right, Gavin, you're also from the industry. Would you like to make your own share?
Yes, I'm also one of the industry people. I mean, I guess we have a slightly different perspective in the sense that, you know, Java in of itself has a large ecosystem, right? So you know, there are already there's already a big community and lots of ways to interact with it. I think what you're asking is kind of a slightly tougher question, I suppose, about some sort of hybrid thing, you know, because I think the thing you were discussing, where you came from, was a problem of getting papers and work accepted in academic conferences, right? And, you know, that's a difficult thing to come at from the perspective of the industrial side of things. Not that we don't support academic conferences and attend them and so on, but it's not something that's kind of a primary focus. So yeah, I don't know. I mean, I think I'm not sure I have any great answers for what you're saying. I understand what you're saying, but I'm not sure I have any good ideas.
I've spent time in industry myself, and I've also seen there that publications can have some value there too. I guess the first question I come across every time I think about this discussion with Hossein is the first thing that we agree we need is a publication? Because I might be getting ahead of myself, because as Darius makes a good point that it should be the community first, but I know sometimes, at least that's the currency. And so if you have an opportunity for publication, then you are now open for business with academia. So I guess I'm just bringing up that because I mean, that was where you began, Hossein, with the question about getting publications.
Yeah, so the matter of publication is what upsetted me, but it needs not necessarily to be a you know, a go. But the fact that we want to do research in programming and not necessarily programming languages that is being done or will be done in mainstream languages, and that is proper research in programming in the sense that academia should be able to accept it. Now, whether or not in the form of, you know, publications is another matter. You know, the fact that this is proper research is something that the academic world fails to understand. The added value of it, they fail to understand. Or at least the vast majority of them. Now, getting back to Gavin. So Gavin, you said in your recorded talk that you do a lot of formal methods in the Java in the Oracle labs, and I was wondering, for example, if you were about to show some of your Java code in a publication, if you want to write a scientific paper that you would like to publish somewhere, and it's full of Java code, do you think, for example, you would be able to publish it?
Well, I mean, I don't think it's an obstacle, but you know, you have to think about your venue, right? I mean, there are many good instances of work that's been done on commercial languages. So, I mean, the ones that happened with colleagues of mine, if I think of all the work that went on in .NET on adding generics, which was done in the lab that I was a member of, you know, that really was what ended up shipping in the product. You know, every Windows user runs generics code, and that was published in PLDI and various other pretty hardcore theory conferences, actually. So I think it's possible to you know, get stuff that's been based on commercial platforms, you know, accepted in those sorts of communities, which I guess are kind of extreme on the spectrum. I think so. I guess the answer to your question is yes, but you have to understand, always the difficulty of getting a paper accepted in conferences is kind of getting the pitch right? So, I mean, obviously, if you're in a theory conference, you don't send 5 pages of code because that's not the audience, right?
Sure, but like, for example, in places like ICFP, you know, you open a random paper and it's full of Haskell, Erlang, or ML, right? It's full of that, and people think that that's brilliant. But if you want to send a paper to ICFP, for example, in which there is Java all the time, then will you get the same acceptance rate? I'm guessing not. That's not because the audience is just, you know, because there's no research value in doing a paper which is all Java. It's because the audience has already blocked their brains on the issue, on the matter. You know, they think that Java is not research. Who wants to think about it? So it's and you mentioned the generics one. Well, the generics one doesn't have all Javas around. It's a few maybe lines of Java here and there, but you know, the vast majority of the paper is just derivation roots. So it's are you suggesting that if I'm thinking that this should be able to survive, then I should find a way to make it presentable so that it pleases the audience I'm presenting it to? Well, not all the time this is possible. Sometimes the research is indeed about the language. So, for example, the things that Yulia spoke to us about today, it's about JavaScript. You should be showing a lot of JavaScript. There's no meaningful way of doing it in a derivation groups format. Or, you know, like the functional gems things, you are showing essentially how to trick the functional programming language of your choice. Why shouldn't there be anything like that in mainstream language? That's kind of, you know, part of the question that I'm asking. Gavin, maybe you have something to point out on that?
not really. I mean, I understand what you're saying. I mean, of course, I mean, if you take ICFP, I mean, the bulk of the work in functional programming is on the most popular functional languages, and Haskell is probably the premier one. But you know, Haskell is not just an academic language, right? I mean, there are many people in the City of London making large amounts of money writing Haskell code. So it's, I think there are venues, but you know, it's difficult. I don't know. I mean, I understand what you're saying, and I think there is difficulty in getting the credit for doing things on big hard code bases rather than overly simplified settings. So I understand that point, but there are venues that don't give credit, and there are venues that do give credit, I suppose. I mean, there are big software engineering conferences where a lot of the work is based around, you know, real life, huge open source platforms and things like that. So I guess that's the sort of thing I had in mind when I was talking about the audience, right?
So in the engineering conferences also, you don't usually have the possibility of showing a lot of code. You are supposed to show results rather than code. I don't quite get to think that that's like programming research that they are after. They are after what they say. They are after software engineering research, which is a bit different.
So I just want to mention something that, like, my observation has been going to academic conferences and also sort of trying to get academia to work well with standardization. Especially within the realm of JavaScript, which isn't a language that you're really going to see very often in academic papers. There are only a few papers that cover JavaScript, but we have, I forget the exact number, I think it was 23 million users of JavaScript. The economic impact of this programming language is enormous, one that's frequently ignored. It's also enormous in terms of the impact on people's lives, in terms of allowing them to start a career. And this is what's at risk when we make mistakes in JavaScript, but we don't have a good communication path or a good working mode to, for example, work with academics and work with people who may be able to prove out things. In addition, the fact that these are not frequently accepted in papers means that very few academics have a desire to work with such a language. We have a couple. We have people working from INRIA who did some verification of JavaScript. We had the University of London, as I mentioned. We have Felienne. We have people from the University of Bergen who are interested. And there have been a couple of other universities that have also gotten involved. But as a research language, it's not particularly appealing. It's got a lot of naughty nooks and crannies that people don't really want to look at. But for us, it's a critical issue. Like, for example, if we want to look at the safety of the language, or if we want to check if something is a sound API. For example, we've done a great deal of discussion recently about how our regex, whether or not our regex is deterministic. So, I mean, a publication would be very interesting if it allowed people to do this kind of work and actually help mainstream languages verify certain aspects or consider certain ideas that aren't being accepted into papers. At the same time, I have seen, for example, there's a really interesting paper that compares the efficacy of programmers working in TypeScript and JavaScript. That's, of course, very interesting, and that's getting published. So there are publications, but to entice people to work on the problems that mainstream languages actually face, it would be very interesting to have something like that.
Right. Well, in the interest of time, I am going to mention a few ideas that came to me over the last few days. So Before that, I would like to mention that Darius advised me on writing this manifest of what PRiML is about. Maybe a couple of pages, maybe just one page. It's very, sound and crisp. We should have a clear indication of what we are up to and what we are not up to. So that's one thing that I found like a real step towards at least establishing the community. So that's something that I would start, and I would be very pleased if you guys can take an active role in collaborating into. The other is if we can have maybe a mailing list or a forum or something similar that can give us the network to talk about these items. I mean, we have talked about them now, and we have and we did that last year in our previous edition of PRiML. But more or less it was left at there, and we didn't have much communication over the course of the year until now. I think this is an item that will help the community thrive, because it's if we stay in touch and if we talk about these, we can get to know more about them and more about who thinks, and we can then come to some conclusions eventually, hopefully. Now I was wondering whether someone would be volunteer for working out how to go for this, a mailing list or forum or anything. Does anyone want to go for that? Establishing the mailing list or the forum? Shall I pick up a name? Let's see. Who's being quiet all the time? Virgil, do you want to go for that?
Well, this is something that I can do, yes.
Okay, thank you very much. So okay, then that's done. Now, I have one more announcement to make. So there was this chap called Vadim Zaitsev, who was here on PRiML last year, and he was at the time of last year employed, or no, he wasn't employed by Raincode, but he had just left Raincode to his university in the Netherlands. So he is at the moment an assistant professor over there, or even an associate professor, I'm not sure. And so he has kindly accepted being like the publication chair of PRiML, collecting something like 5 pages of LNCS from each and every of you, please, in which you explain your kind of contribution to programming research in your own mainstream languages, like a short version of your talk, so I'm going to send you a follow-up email in which I will request you to contribute to that. It's not going to be a formal proceeding. It will be for this year. It will be at the discretion of the authors. We will help with the editorial points, but we will not be able to review properly unless you guys, one or two of you guys wants to pick up the task and go on for the or even all of you would like to go on for reviewing one another's papers. So here's how I'm going to go about that one. Is anyone interested in reviewing papers for that post proceeding?
I'm happy to review.
Great.
I can't submit anything because it's already been published.
You can't because you have already published it, yeah?
Yeah.
Okay.
But I can review. So
well, you know, Magnus, so maybe the fact that you have published it does not quite count because, first of all, this is not a publication. This doesn't count as a publication. Secondly, this is right. Secondly, there is this is we are taking a very specific angle into the problem. So we are specifically after the values that you think you brought to the research because you did your research in a mainstream language. I don't know, I haven't read your paper, but I suspect you didn't, you know, pitch your paper to that, did you?
not so much, no.
Okay. You still have something to write, but I highly appreciate that. So thank you very much. So Paul has also stated his.
I would be happy to review a paper too. I mean, bear in mind, I know it sounds like ludicrous, but you know, I'm kind of a busy guy, but I'd be happy to contribute. But the way you describe this, it sounds like you're more about compiling references to papers in the vast number of areas that have that twist regarding mainstream languages. So you could consider, rather than have, say, you know, new publication, just, you know, have, say, a monthly mailing list saying, okay, these are all the papers we found this month that seem to be relevant to the topic of mainstream languages. Some will be, for instance, in compiler construction, because that's where, you know, that's the kind of place I attend. I assume that in PLDIs, a couple will be there as well. And in other words, this idea of having this as being an aspect, no pun intended, but really an aspect where you essentially compile papers from a very wide spectrum and keeping track of whatever seems to be relevant to the topic you're interested in. For instance, Yulia said that there were no papers regarding JavaScript. I know of a few that are being published. I mean, obviously in my domain, how to efficiently compile JavaScript, which is, you know, like a very specific and very narrow understanding of the theme. But my guess, and it's a guess, I mean, I don't know all the academic venues around, but my guess is that there are more venues where you could find a slice of the publication that could be relevant to your concern.
I did say that JavaScript papers do get published, but they are rather rare and they have very specific things that they look at.
Right.
Yeah.
So I know, for example, that VUB, the Vrije University of Brussels, they have a huge group which does JavaScript. So there's also this Danish university, and it's a very famous university. It's considered to. What was it? Sorry, Aarhus.
Aarhus.
Yes,
Aarhus.
Aarhus. Yeah. They also do a lot of publication. They also have a big group in dynamic languages. So yeah, but you see these things. So I think Darius's point is very nice that we have to, you know, in order to have the gravity, we need to first of all help the gravity ourselves. So we need to collect these things and speak about them in terms of the reasons why we think that they are valuable. So, I see two. Yeah, go on, Réka.
Yeah, I just want to ask, whenever I look at these big programming languages conferences, and I'm sure that I don't know all of them, but like, for example, eCoop or Flash, or these are two that I know. And I have a feeling that their organizing committees are often overlapping. So I feel like there is this group of people, most of them like famous researchers, I guess, that are frequently organizing these kinds of big conferences and communities. And I was wondering if maybe it would be worth a shot to like come in contact with some of them and maybe ask their opinion, and because they have a lot of experience in this space, like maybe what do they think about it? Do they think it's possible, and how to go about it?
Yeah, I'd agree with that, Réka.
And just because, for example, Anders Muller, who is from Aarhus University, who is this famous static analysis researcher for JavaScript, I think he's also frequently on these organizing committees. So that's how it came to my mind.
Yeah, very good point. Very good point. So, okay, indeed, we should do that. We are running a bit out of time, so I'm going to rush into the next things that I have written. There is the matter of, I tried to compile this list of reasons why people reject research done in mainstream languages. And I have I think like 4 or 5 items on the list. I was wondering whether any of you guys can work out a questionnaire which we can maybe distribute, in which we ask people about whether or not they have been, not necessarily in the publications, but their research ideas have been rejected simply because they were done in mainstream language. And then we say, do you think that one of these was your reason? And why do you, sorry, one of these were the reasons why your work was rejected? And if so, why do you think they were wrong? So for example, I mentioned, so some of the typical answers that I get is that, oh, this is just engineering work. You're just implementing an old idea. And I think that's a very dumb question, dumb response, because, simply because this is an idea that was already, explored elsewhere, does not mean that in the new setting, which is the setting of a mainstream language, it will necessarily give the same results. So each language has its own combination of features, and just because it worked in language L with one combination of features does not necessarily imply that it will also work in the language L prime with its own combination of features. So, I would like to have a questionnaire which says, was your work rejected because it was in a mainstream language? Was this one of the reasons? What is your thoughts about why this is wrong? And is there any other reason why you think your work was rejected? So this would help us create, compile a list of the reasons why people think that our works are daft, and then we might actually out of that have a better understanding of what we can do about it. Anyone who could?
Yeah, aren't you afraid of sounding like the whining club? I mean, this is a small setting, so I apologize for being blunt. Social, so let social settings aside. But isn't that a little bit?
This is being recorded.
That's okay.
Recorded.
That's okay. My wife can testify. I've said way worse than this. But isn't this a bit desperate to go after people and say, "Oh, you haven't been so why is it?" I mean.
Maybe.
Okay, the optics aren't great. Let's put it this way.
Okay.
And the truth is, my guess is that you and we could have a drink, and over 5 minutes we'd come with the reasons, and 90% of our reasons would be the right ones. Like it's a bit snobbish. Obviously, Haskell looks better on an academic resume than Java. I mean, the reasons are pretty much predictable. Going to Paul to the questionnaire, there's something about building the whining club. Say, oh, people don't like us, and why is it so? And I don't think it's you don't want to be part of a whining club. If whining with an H, right? I mean, this is not about what you think.
Well, what about having something that we at least circulate amongst ourselves? Maybe we would not publicize it, but we can still publicize amongst ourselves. Oh, so Stephen Wolfram is here as well. Okay. Right. Hello, Stephen. So, good. Okay, we were wrapping up on the previous topic that we had in PRiML, and in 2 minutes we are going to have Stephen. Okay, I think we had quite a good number of results in this chat.